All right, welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
This is number 9.
Number 9. Wow.
Deep dive number 9.
Deep dive number 9. It's a big one.
Yeah, so, for this one, you wanted to take a look at Strategy Safari by Henry Mintzberg.
Yeah, it's a classic, and so many people have recommended it to me.
And it really gets into, the many schools of thought that there are around strategy formation.
Right.
And it's a lot to unpack.
It is, yeah.
So this deep dive will hopefully get you started on your own journey with it.
Awesome. Yeah, and if anyone wants to follow along even more, be sure to check out MBACandidate on social media.
So yeah, like we were saying, this book is pretty dense, Strategy Safari.
Yeah.
And, Mintzberg starts off with this really interesting analogy, right?
Yeah, he talks about the blind men and the elephant.
Right?
And how each of the blind men is feeling a different part of the elephant.
Right.
And they each come to a completely different conclusion about what this elephant is.
Right. And so one of them thinks it's like a snake and the other one thinks it's a wall.
A tree trunk, yeah.
Yeah, and the point is...
They're all right in a way.
Right, yeah.
But they're also all wrong because they're only looking at one part of it.
Right.
They're not seeing the whole.
Right, and that's kind of what Mintzberg is getting at with strategy, right?
Exactly. I mean, so often we get fixated on one particular approach or one framework.
Right.
And we miss the bigger picture.
And there are so many different schools of thought about it.
Yeah. And what he did was he kind of went through the literature and he actually looked at what companies were doing.
Wow.
And he came up with 10 distinct schools of thought on strategy formation.
Wow, that's
a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I mean, it really highlights the richness and also kind of the messiness of the field.
Right, and so he then organizes those 10 schools into like 4 main groups to kind of help us wrap our minds around it.
Yeah, it's a way to kind of make sense of all the different perspectives.
And so we're going to be touching on some of those core developments today. So one of the interesting things that Mintzberg talks about is, even the word strategy, right?
Yeah.
We use it all the time.
Yeah, what does it even mean, right?
Well, what does it really mean?
I mean, most people think of it as like a plan.
Right.
Like, this is what we're going to do.
Right. Like, what are our intentions?
Yeah, our intentions for the future.
Yeah.
But Mintzberg points out that it can also be a pattern.
A pattern.
Yeah. Like, in the past, what have we actually done?
Interesting.
Right. So, for example, if a company keeps launching really high-end products, you could say that they have a premium strategy.
Right.
Even if they never actually said that was their plan.
Interesting.
It just kind of emerges from their actions.
Right.
And so he introduces these really important concepts: intended strategy, realized strategy,
right,
premeditated strategy, non-realized strategy, and then my personal favorite, emergent strategy. And emergent strategy is fascinating because it's like...
So tell me about that.
It's like this pattern that arises from a bunch of decisions and actions that weren't necessarily intended to form a cohesive strategy.
Wow.
It just kind of happens.
Okay, so give me an example.
Like, imagine a company that's just kind of acquiring small tech startups, right?
Yeah.
Seemingly at random.
Right.
But over time, it becomes clear that, they're actually building a presence in this particular technology sector.
I see.
Even though they never explicitly said that was their strategy from the beginning.
That's super interesting.
Right. And so it's like a strategy that emerges from action rather than preceding it.
That's really cool. So he's got this idea of strategy as a plan and strategy as a pattern.
Exactly.
So how else does he define strategy?
Well, he also talks about strategy as position.
Position.
Yeah, like where you choose to locate yourself in the market.
Okay.
So, like a budget airline, right?
Yeah.
They're positioning themselves by offering no-frills flights at a super low cost.
Mm-hmm.
That's their position in the market.
Okay, so that makes sense. How about perspective?
Ah, yes, perspective.
Is that another one?
Yeah, that's another way he talks about strategy.
Okay.
And perspective is more about how you view the world.
Interesting.
Your core values, your assumptions.
Okay.
So like those old film camera companies.
Yeah.
They really struggled with the rise of digital photography.
Right.
Because their whole perspective was rooted in film.
Right.
They couldn't see the world through the lens of digital.
Right, that makes sense. And the last one?
The last one is strategy as a ploy.
A ploy?
Yeah.
What's that?
So it's like a specific maneuver, often short-term, to outwit a competitor.
Okay.
So like imagine a company announcing a product launch way before it's actually ready.
Okay.
Just to scare off rivals.
Wow, I see.
Right. The real strategy isn't the product itself, it's the deterrent effect.
Yeah. I see. And, he talks about the role of top management in all of
Oh,
this.
yeah. He has some really interesting thoughts on that.
Right, because, we often think of them as...
The strategists,
Yes.
the masterminds.
Yeah, sitting up in their ivory towers.
Exactly. But Mintzberg says that's not really what they do.
Right.
He argues that a lot of their work is actually about reinforcing existing ways of thinking.
Wow.
Nurturing the organizational culture, gathering information.
Okay.
It's less about coming up with grand new ideas and more about maintaining stability.
Wow. So it's more about kind of steering the ship than
Yeah.
completely redesigning it.
Yeah, and he also highlights this tension between stability and the need to adapt.
Right, because things change all the time. Right.
All the time.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you balance being consistent with being flexible?
Right.
And he uses this great analogy of strategy sometimes acting like blinders.
Blinders.
Yeah, like on a horse.
Okay.
It helps you focus,
Yeah.
but you might miss what's happening on the periphery.
I see.
And so it's this constant balancing act.
Really interesting.
So he doesn't think there's one grand unified theory of strategy, but he does say that the real synthesis has to happen in the mind of the individual.
Right, like me, you.
Yeah, exactly.
The listener.
Yeah, the listener. So his book is really about giving you the tools to develop your own personal understanding of strategy.
That's a really powerful idea. And those tools are...
Those tools are the 10 schools of thought that he lays out.
Oh, there's 10 schools.
Yeah, he gives us a framework for understanding each of those schools.
Right.
Their assumptions, their strengths, their weaknesses.
Okay, so what are some of those schools?
Well, we've got the design school, the planning school, the positioning school,
Okay.
entrepreneurial school, the cognitive school, the learning school.
Oh, wow, there are a lot.
Yeah, there's a power school, the cultural school, the environmental school,
Okay.
and the configuration school.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is. And as we go through these, we'll kind of see how they each offer a different lens for looking at strategy.
Okay, that sounds great. So let's start with the design school.
Okay, so the design school is all about deliberate strategy creation.
It's very top down. Okay. The idea is that the top managers are the ones who conceive and articulate the strategy. Right, like they're the architects. Exactly. They're the architects drawing up the blueprints.
Okay, so it's a very top-down approach.
Very top down. And they believe in careful thought and analysis before taking action.
Okay.
They do consider the environment, but it's more like a set of factors to be analyzed.
Right.
Rather than something you're constantly interacting with and learning from.
Okay, so what are some of the criticisms of the design school?
Well, Mintzberg says that they often overlook organizational learning.
What do you mean by that?
It's like, how do you really understand your capabilities in the market?
Yeah.
The design school relies heavily on formal analysis and executive discussions.
Right.
But Mintzberg argues that you can't truly know your strengths and weaknesses without actually trying things out.
I see. So without actually getting your hands dirty?
Exactly. You need to experiment. You need to make mistakes.
Right. You need to learn from those mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. And the design school can sometimes create a disconnect between thinking and doing.
Interesting. What else?
Well, he also points out that they put a lot of emphasis on explicit articulation of strategy.
Okay.
Like, if you don't have a written document that clearly outlines your strategy, that's seen as a weakness.
Okay.
But Mintzberg argues that there can be valid reasons for not wanting to fully articulate your strategy.
Like what?
Well, especially in rapidly changing environments.
Right.
How can you say you're adapting if your strategy is fixed and everyone knows it?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. It can create a false sense of certainty in an uncertain world.
Wow, that's a good point. Okay, so how about the planning school?
All right. So the planning school builds on some of the ideas of the design school.
Okay.
But it takes a much more formal and systematic approach.
Okay, so what does that look like?
They're all about detailed analysis, setting very specific objectives,
Okay.
creating elaborate plans with timelines and budgets.
So lots of spreadsheets.
Lots of spreadsheets.
Okay.
And you often see strategic planning departments popping up in these organizations.
I see. So it's a very structured approach.
Very structured, very proactive.
Proactive.
Yeah, they believe that by analyzing the future,
Right.
they can develop strategies to deal with anticipated trends and challenges.
So they're trying to get ahead of the curve.
Exactly. And tools like SWOT analysis are really important to them.
All right. SWOT analysis, that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Exactly. But Mintzberg has some criticisms here, too.
Like what?
Well, he points out how difficult it is to accurately forecast the future.
Right. Especially over the long term.
Especially over the long term.
Yeah, things change so quickly.
Yeah, so how much faith can you really put in those long-range plans?
Right.
And he suggests that while planning can be helpful, it can also make you inflexible.
Right. Like if you're too wedded to the plan,
Exactly.
you might miss opportunities.
Exactly. He also talks about the flow of information in organizations. The planning school assumes that you can gather all this objective data and send it up the chain.
Right, to the top managers.
Yeah. But Mintzberg says that data can be outdated, it might miss important nuances,
Right.
and it can be overwhelming.
Right, you can get lost in the data.
Exactly. And he actually says that strategic planning has been misnamed.
Wow.
It should have been called strategic programming.
Interesting.
Because he thinks it's more about formalizing existing strategies than actually generating new ones.
Wow. So he's not a huge fan of the planning school.
Well, he sees value in planners.
Okay.
He thinks they can be good at analysis and encouraging systematic thinking.
Right, so they have their place.
They have their place, but they shouldn't be the ones calling all the shots.
That makes sense. Okay, so how about the positioning school?
All right. So the positioning school is all about the external environment.
Okay.
It's heavily influenced by economics.
Okay.
And it focuses on how organizations position themselves in the market to gain an advantage.
Right, so it's very outward looking.
Very outward looking. Yeah. And they love Michael Porter.
Michael Porter.
Yeah. His frameworks for industry analysis are central to this school.
Right, and Porter's 5 forces framework, right?
Absolutely. That's like their Bible.
Right. It's all about analyzing industry rivalry, the threat of new entrants.
Bargaining power of buyers and suppliers, threat of substitutes.
Yeah, so it's a very comprehensive framework.
Very comprehensive. And they believe in these generic strategies.
Generic strategies.
Yeah, the idea is that there are a few fundamental ways to achieve competitive advantage.
Okay.
Like cost leadership or differentiation.
Okay.
And those can be applied across industries.
Right, so it's like a one-size-fits-all approach in a way.
In a way, yeah. But Mintzberg has some critiques here, too.
What does he say?
Well, he points out that this focus on industry structure and generic strategies can be limiting.
How so?
It might be good for analyzing existing industries,
okay,
but not so much for creating new strategies or adapting to radical change.
Right.
And it can be a bit too focused on economics.
Okay, I see.
And he also says it's more applicable to stable, mature industries.
Right, so not so much for like startups or...
Not so much for fast-moving industries.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, how about the entrepreneurial school?
Okay, so the entrepreneurial school is all about the leader.
The leader?
Yeah, their vision, their intuition, their drive.
Right, like Steve Jobs.
Yeah,
like those larger-than-life figures.
Exactly, and their vision is central.
Right, like where they want to take the company.
Exactly. And that vision can be really inspiring.
Right.
Even if it's not always clearly articulated.
Right, it's more like a guiding star.
Yeah, and they acknowledge that strategy can be both intentional and emergent.
Okay.
So the leader sets the direction.
Right.
But they also adapt along the way.
Right, so it's a combination.
Yeah. And Mintzberg notes that a lot of the writing on this school is in biographies and popular press.
Right, so it's very much focused on the individual.
Yeah, it's the heroic leader narrative.
Right, which can be inspiring, but also...
Can also be a bit misleading.
Right.
Because it can lead to biases, overconfidence, reluctance to listen to others.
Right, so there are downsides.
Definitely.
Okay, so how about the learning school?
All right, so the learning school is all about adaptation and evolution.
Okay.
They believe that strategies emerge from the collective experience of everyone in the organization.
Okay, so it's not just the leader.
Not just the leader, everyone's involved.
Okay.
And they see strategy formation as a process of trial and error.
Okay.
Taking small steps, seeing what works, adjusting course.
So it's very iterative.
Very iterative, yeah.
Okay.
And they emphasize experimentation, feedback, continuous improvement.
Okay, so it's a very dynamic approach.
Very dynamic, yeah. Strategies aren't fixed. They're constantly evolving.
Interesting. Okay, how about the power school?
Okay, so the power school brings in the dimension of politics.
Politics.
Yeah, power dynamics.
Okay, so it's getting a little messy.
It's getting real, yeah.
Right.
Because they recognize that organizations are made up of individuals and groups.
Yeah.
With their own agendas and interests.
Right.
And that influences decisions.
Right, so it's not always rational.
Not always rational, no.
Okay.
And they see strategy formation as a process of negotiation, coalition building, sometimes even conflict.
Okay.
Both inside and outside the organization.
Right, so you've got internal politics and external politics.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a lot to navigate.
It is. But Mintzberg points out that politics can sometimes be useful.
How so?
Well, it can challenge the status quo.
Okay.
It can ensure that different perspectives are considered.
Right, so it's not always a bad thing.
Not always, no.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, how about the cultural school?
Okay, so the cultural school sees strategy as rooted in shared beliefs and values.
Okay, so it's about the culture of the organization.
Exactly. It's about the collective identity.
Okay.
And they believe that strategy emerges from this shared understanding.
Okay.
It's not imposed from the top.
Right, it comes from within.
Yeah, it's organic.
Yep.
And Mintzberg highlights how powerful a strong culture can be.
Right, it can really drive the organization forward.
Yeah. But he also notes that it can make it hard to adapt to change.
Right, because people can get stuck in their ways.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, how about the environmental school?
Okay, so the environmental school emphasizes the external environment.
Right, the things outside the organization's control.
Exactly. And they say that organizations have to adapt to these forces to survive.
So it's a very reactive approach.
It can be, yeah. They see the environment as the primary driver of strategy.
Okay.
Things like market conditions, technology, regulations, all of that.
Right, those external forces.
Yeah. And one interesting perspective within this school is population ecology.
Population ecology.
Yeah, they have this kind of Darwinian view.
Okay.
They say the environment selects which organizations survive.
This was like survival of the fittest.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a pretty harsh view.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But it highlights how important it is to be adaptable.
Right, to be able to change with the times.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, and finally, the configuration school.
Okay, so the configuration school tries to bring everything together.
Everything together.
Yeah, it's like the grand synthesis.
Wow.
They see organizations as configurations.
Configuration.
Yeah, like coherent sets of characteristics.
Okay.
And they go through periods of stability and transformation.
Okay.
And the idea is that different approaches to strategy might be appropriate at different times.
I see.
Depending on the organization's configuration and the stage of its development.
So it's like a more nuanced view.
More nuanced, yeah. And Mintzberg has contributed a lot to this school.
How so?
Well, he's written about organizational archetypes.
Archetypes.
Yeah, like common configurations.
Okay, give me an example.
Like the entrepreneurial startup, the machine bureaucracy, the professional autocracy.
Okay, so he's identified these different types.
Yeah, and each type has its own strengths and weaknesses.
Right, so it's about understanding which type you are and what that means for your strategy.
Exactly.
Okay, that's really interesting. So as we wrap up here, it's clear that this world of strategic management is super complex.
It is, yeah.
And Mintzberg's book really encourages us to appreciate all these different perspectives.
Yeah, he's not saying one is right and the others are wrong.
Right, it's about understanding all of them.
Exactly. And we've seen how important it is to think about strategy as both a plan and a pattern.
Right, both deliberate and emergent.
Yeah, and we've seen the role of leadership, the impact of culture, the influence of the environment.
Right, all these factors come into play.
And he really challenges those simplistic approaches.
Right, the one-size-fits-all solutions.
Yeah, because there are no easy answers.
Right.
It's all about context.
And Mintzberg suggests that we need to integrate these different viewpoints in our own thinking.
Yeah, develop our own personal understanding of strategy.
Right, and that's what we've tried to do in this deep dive.
Hopefully giving you a good starting point.
Yeah, and now it's up to you to continue the journey.
Yeah, explore these schools of thought further.
Think about which ones resonate with you.
Which ones you agree with, which ones you disagree with.
Right, and how you can apply them to your own work.
Exactly.
So what are your key takeaways from this?
Yeah, what stood out to you?
What questions do you still have?
Yeah, what are you going to explore further?
And as a final thought, remember that analogy of the blind man and the elephant?
Yeah.
Now that you've seen all the different parts,
yeah.
How will you approach understanding the whole?
Right. How will you see the whole elephant?
All right. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.